teacher, Geshe Thabkhe, and good morning, Katrina Brooks, our interpreter. And welcome to everyone who's joining us online for these teachings on Kamalishila's stages of the path of meditation. We'll begin our teachings this morning with prayers and recitations, and you can find a link for those in the chat box. And if you have any questions about the teachings, you can also post those in the chat box, and we'll pass those along to Geshe Thabkhe. So now we'll begin with our prayers and recitations.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower of the world, supreme God of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, and I bow, with pure bodies, forms supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah. Ngoja tena lobe shiwa le song le rwa. Oh, tene tenjun dene nyeba shindo kaas. Kibi tenjup toba joba las. Keten dila pamba madu na. Shindi yandan joba kala yurus she song badar. Tenjun dene nyeba shindo kaas. Yawa ke rwa. Nyawa yida tenju. Sachiring buddha tendel keo marwa. Ane yu tagu che mesa rwa tende. Tene lalo che liya mene jikasira. Lalo kewa. Oh, tene yu tagu lalo. Awambu matama. Keshen komito wala kuba rwa shiva tende keo marwa. Tawa lokwa jimba tende machi beche. Tende keo na che chubala telki marwa, kumgi marwa, che chubu marwa. Cheza tende le te kele. Taro sonza telwa che chube niru re se kora. Ine jorba se tunji kanga jorta yore se. Sanje jitenji kamla chemba. Mang keba mang shewa tum yengerwa. Keba jiri cha kara sanje chumden den ma chumba se che. Nambar tago mewa se se. Jiten kam cha jigdu gora. Tanda jitenji kam dele sanje chumden den ngama chen simbarwa. Oh, sanje chumba se. Ine chen sinne ya. Tanda sanje sumbe che ti ma nyamba se nete yorwa. Sanje chunda tamjut ten sara. Tempa neta, te tempe kyunti tanda nete yora. Ngara su che sungde yore. Nyamsulangde rogwa yorwa. Oh, sanje chunda tamjut tempa neta. Techi ju, shenji taru, nyingzi wes. Shenda hati ni che chube tenji chorge. Che chubala, che chumdi yune, che shenge. O tezu kanga yosan tande. Tari nga ju Tata milu top shabade pe chashin borese. Chutubala telwa tungin kankan jortenge. Tenjun dene nyebar shindu kaasa. Oda dende milu top yade shindu nekale kabure sungudwa. O techi lamna.
So here, to begin with, as the master Shantideva has said, if with this life of leisures and endowments, which is so difficult to find, if I fail now to turn this to my profit, to use it for benefit, then how could I possibly find such a situation again? So right now we have this precious life with all of the kinds of freedoms or leisures and the endowments to be able to practice the Dharma. We have been born in a situation as a human, and not only as a human, but not in sort of like borderlands or sort of extreme isolated places where the Dharma hasn't arrived. We aren't in a situation where we don't have, say, all of our faculties to be able to practice the Dharma, or we aren't really embedded in wrong views that make it impossible for us to actually habituate us to the Dharma. So we have this kind of situation of freedom from those conditions where we are unable to practice. And it's also in the case that we have all of the kind of opportunities. Not only have we been born as a human, but we have the Buddha's teachings. So this eon is one in which the Buddha has come. Many eons, we call them dark eons, because the space of time in which there is becoming and abiding, destruction, and so forth, no Buddha comes, no Buddha teaches, but a Buddha has come to the world. And not only that, he taught the Dharma. And not only did he teach the Dharma, but the Dharma remains remains to this day. There are those that follow after it. We are able to have those teach us the Dharma and have friends help us to be able to practice. So right now we have all of the conducive conditions to be able to actually make progress in the Dharma, all the kind of external conditions or opportunities, as well as the kind of internal conditions. So we should recognize that this life that we have right now is extremely precious. And rather than letting it go to waste, we should make it profitable. We should use it in a meaningful way.
뭐야? 당신이 네버 신도가서 다 네가와레스테 교디 줍가와서자 네가와서 그것도 교디 마음부지 쳐고도 미게 주파 개와주 좀네 멜리 삼톱나 테데그메도와 대자마이 버산제 템바단제 텐데 루티 교디 미게와 주파 개와주 줍와 텐데 tenjubi meli di tobi ali tuji mabuji sangkure te gyudi shindu trupkawa nye kawa tenjubi nye bar shindu kas nye kawa di gyudi trupkawa sunda nye kawa sikudwa te pechani sungudwa namdi kanzo kyazu chimbi nala ribe longachi lo kya kya doli yango tas to chigi biche ani nye shindu biche ikan yungi sergi chi pa tai kyamzu pa su yugi biche te nal koki lo kya ya goya tambata ti ikantinale ko pokatinale gochubadi sinda samre mato misibare o tele jakon batire sungudwa tenju deni ni bar shindu kas kibi tundu toba jubala sta tanda ni ka kyo ngama de kyuje mambo je sa ne ra tene tanda sanje tambata je ne tende melu tobe kam dele sungora kibi tundu toba jubala sta ngara zo kyo shima kyo tenji tanda ro kewa chima lada mi koba nyawa yeda tundri kewa ka lada mi koba toba che kibu chungyo lamrwa mekiwa chuti pang shala chewe sawam shala nyoba chenge mekiwa chuti pang kewa chuti trubne yani kewa chima nyesola machi biche lada mi koba toba che di kibu chungyo che yinba di che teni kibu ndringdega ti 미케와 추파 케와 추tumne lada mi koban thogure yena lada mi koban di tenleya ane koale tendo tarba chi cheguru mato tia lada mi koban tia ko koare kezule tunga yore samne lada mi koban sam kewa tato da leda nyumo bewange ngeson somle kena da lada mi le kena tunga yore samne tungele tendo tarba debe kibi tarba 기분 좋은 게 된다 된 것도 아니 얘네 기분 첨부도 코알에 딴도 타고 때 란치부 타면 되고 말에 현대 밤에 처음에 심지 탐제 란을 쟁이 장바 장아래 란다 타니 뭐 년대 장아래 대조야 동에다 저와 자고 그래서 대 제와를 딴데 란을 내가 매배 란 견 참마 세기 방기 연대 쭉 제제 kale mambo kemne kewane kewa kale kemne sanje je koma toba chagi sanje je koma top sona ni simje tamje gata beba meba tarchimba nyoga yosawa kone tup gresam kibu chimbe tanda tuweche somdoa kibu tundu toba chuba las this is sona.
So, as this verse says, this life of leisure and opportunity is extremely difficult to find. And the reason that it's so extremely difficult to come across is because we need to accumulate all of the proper causes in order to gain such a rebirth. So abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous actions and so forth, we need to do these actions in a previous life in order to have all of the necessary causes for such a rebirth. And it's said that the causes are extremely rare to accumulate. And so therefore, this kind of body is extremely rare, as the example that is given also in Shantideva of gaining a human rebirth is as common as, so if we have this huge vast ocean and this blind turtle who is coming up to the surface once every 100 years, and on the surface of this ocean there is a small wooden ring, the chance of that turtle putting its head through that ring is like the chance of us gaining this kind of rebirth in the future. And so recognizing how extremely rare this is, we then try to make meaningful the life that we have have. And this begins by recognizing again that we have in previous lives accumulated the causes for such a rebirth. And so the first kind of stage of training, that of the being of small capacity, is recognizing that what makes this life meaningful is being able to accumulate the causes to attain such a good rebirth again in the future, a life as a human or a god. So making sure that we don't fall into the lower realms by practicing virtue and abandoning non-virtue, this is the kind of training for the being of small capacity. But then one moves on to thinking, well, even if I accumulate such virtue to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, it's still in the nature of suffering. I'm still subject to the sufferings of samsara because it's taken under the control of karma and the afflictions. So whether that's a rebirth in the lower realms or whether a rebirth as a human or a god, it's still not a lasting, stable kind of freedom. So a being of middling capacity goes beyond the kind of good rebirth of a human or a god to wanting this kind of freedom, a stable, lasting happiness. But then one thinks, well, just to strive for my own liberation alone is not okay, because all of these sentient beings that have acted as my mother and father, they too are in this cycle of suffering. And so I want to be able to free them as well, bring them to a state of freedom. And for that sake, one needs to strive for the state of Buddhahood, a state in which one has abandoned all faults and gained all good qualities. Thereby, one is able to work for the benefit of other sentient beings. So slowly over time, lifetime after lifetime, one will accumulate these kinds of qualities, develop these qualities, and abandon one fault until one gets to that state of Buddhahood where one is effortlessly able to work for the welfare of other sentient beings. So that's the kind of contemplation of the being of great capacity.
Oh yeah, getting dealer pemba maduna sudwa. To be tendru to what you tanda, so tanda. Wonderful me kovada, and it tarba toya shadow, chakda, nyomo payata. Tamje Chimbe Kovan Tobe Shedo, Dagbe Shenje Chaju Sembla Soba, Sambata Niji Komala Soba, Tezu Chendila Majena Sioto, getting dealer, Gawachima Penjele Pembe, Gibu Chongudan, Jung the Chimbe Church, Ranga Majena Sioto, Rana Pembe Church Majena, Maduna, getting dealer Pemba Maduna, Chindi and Danjoba College. Gawachima Namso in it, Message. The ten sambo church from the Karina to Tunga Tungi Sanga Dede, Toya Kabure Dase, Karasne, Judy to Kabure, Songo, Chindi and Danjova Kalanjus, or Tesoda, Kibuchungo and Jenda Chibu, Lamlia Lochane, Roa, Chungula Locha, Tenen Jungla Locha, Tene Kibuchimbula Lochane, Simje Tamje to Standi Jacoba, Tobiane. Top never chichine chichagi teacher to chinyangi some cool set on the sabashos or
So again, when we have this precious human rebirth, we should, while we have this opportunity, use it for our benefit, make it meaningful in terms of gaining a good rebirth in the future, striving for liberation or striving for that state of Buddhahood. And in order to do so, abandoning our attachment and hatred, engaging in the practice of virtue, meditating on love and compassion and bodhicitta. If one fails to do that right now, then what will one have in the future? How will one gain such a state again? So here, this life, which is so difficult to find, we should right now take advantage of it by making it meaningful, by training our mind in the trainings of the being of small capacity, middling capacity, and great capacity, thinking that I will, by whatever means, strive for the state of Buddhahood to be able to benefit all sentient beings. And for that purpose, I'm now going to listen to the Dharma. So in that way, we should set such a motivation for listening to the teachings.
oh yeah, Tanga Lucasi Chanju Sim Kibuchungu de Peshe Sar Kopta Trujire, Nikibun during this year, Kibuchimbu Lam Chanju Sim the Chamba and Niji to share Sarvatalia, Junde Manga to Yukon Simki to Peshe Sarasuridoa. Taking as a district share the Pejan Dinalia, Kumriminal Mebe Chanju Simki to see. Dakshen Yamje Kone Semki to Soda. Junju Kapsu Shangani. Dakshen Yamje Kone Chanju to Semki to Shora. Or did it introduce Lamna Samtua? The Junju Kapsu Gudwa. Tada Shandu Nyambana Tambuni Mara Tada Shandu Tambuni Bedo. Madam Mercasha. Oh, the time doing better. Tada Shandu Nyambana Tambuni to bed comes. Deda Tunga Nyambana Tamjetash Songarchas. Give Chimbu Capsule. Daving had to do Manga to the Capsule social pen talk about social cutting Chambu, but today some Tagiora. Tatan did some Tagio mother. Rana Penta Mata Samlo Matan. Simja Tamjet, the one dollar to him and do around the Chibare to awesome. Ran the one dollar to him and do a dinner. She Simja meet $7 Sora you get some. The one dollar to him and do a Chanya to awesome. Or did the Tatan send the Yamban Tambo in the bed of Tambo social and she make anger some. Takshan Yamba de Congo to Tata Shantunyamba and Tambo to bed. Karin Yam Gurusina Tanda de Capso. Ran the $1 to him and do by Sendo Shan and the $1 to him and do by so check by your some and under some Saturday some Tangura. Namjung as a social the $1 to him and do Ayabo Yongo to Boyong and between some of the Shanda to Courage and some Satona Shiko Karchan and I keep a mess and Rotayora. What in the members some Tanguris would do. Oh, Nana, she calls you at the $1 to him and do what they Tungi Kanjay in Kugumare, Tawaka in the Kozo Kugre, some the Swat Yokura. The Tata Shandu Yambane Tambunya to bed the common city, Sora de Lekudua, Simja Kandichi Tona, Tidunion Getche, Sangata Chibade, Samna, and the Koto Sam Tangra, Saturn City, Samtan, Social Jimmy, some Dana, Karchana, never change, some Kodua. The members to Koda, Tada Shandu Yambane Tambuni to Bedeco. Teta Tunga Yambana Tamja Dash so much as the $1 Tunga Medo so much about to us Rana she. No so the what the Karina took to us. Tunga the Karina say a Tapsi check to us. Then she Shandala Suzu Pama said it to Benyadita. She saw the Kawayina Soso never can you tanje. Any Shandaga Takanga say the what to watch over Eswara. Tata Shandunyam Tambu Bed Tunganyam then Tamjet Dash so much as. Some social nation, the way to be a Kangan Sunyet and Tapsi Chibacha would say. Tunga in the decisions, Mitchell Kangan should not call Kalendo some. This sale go never so good as some social never in a zero check with the chara. The watch in a tico shall Kangan should only take a tear, the watch in a to roach with a soda. Tata Shandunyam Tambo the Beteta Tunganyam Tamjet Dash so much. Socialia Kangan may have the Yabu had on the Sungi Chivira. Tapsi Chico, or didn't she Shandala check with Esse? Tarishan Tamun Matera don't Tamja Tash so much charge. Oh, the ditch song to all the teacher Lamna. Yeah.
So here in the text, then we have gone through the kind of scope of the being of small capacity, and then that of the being of middling capacity, thinking about the various sufferings of samsara and wanting to get out of that. And then we moved on to thinking about the kind of contemplations of a being of great capacity, including meditating on love and compassion and so forth, particularly through this it's sometimes called sixfold cause and then the one effect, or sevenfold cause and effect method. So here I wanted to take some time to actually discuss the kind of method of equalizing and exchanging self and other that doesn't come here in this text, but is explained more clearly in the Shantideva's text. So when we are doing this generation of bodhicitta based upon the sevenfold cause and effect method, we really begin by contemplating the benefit that others have done to us or for us. And so we're thinking from that kind of perspective of, well, I should benefit these beings because they have benefited me. Well, when it comes to the exchange of self and other, we really are doing this on the basis of recognizing the equality of our desire to have happiness and to not suffer with that of every other sentient being. So as Shantideva says, strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. thus be the guardian of all as of yourself. So here we begin in this method of equalizing and exchanging self and other, of recognizing that every sentient being has this desire to have happiness and a desire not to have to suffer. We are exactly the same in this way. Now, normally we sort of think about our own desires. We think about our own wish for happiness and our own desire not to suffer. And we kind of are indifferent to the desires of others. We sort of think of them almost like inanimate objects. Whatever happens to them may happen. It doesn't really affect me. And so we need to get away from that kind of feeling and develop a sense of feeling that others have that exact same desire, the wish not to have to suffer and the want to have happiness. And so in this way, we recognize that we want to help others. So not only these others that are sort of symbolized by our mothers and fathers, but all sentient beings who have acted in that capacity, we should want to help them in accomplishing their aims, help them in this desire not to suffer and the wish to have happiness. So we shouldn't just sort of have this thought of, well, whatever happens, happens, but actually try to help beings accomplish their happiness and help beings eliminate their sufferings. So as we recognize that our desire for happiness and desire not to suffer is exactly the same as all other sentient beings. As it says here, in joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus be the guardian of all as of yourself. So in the way that we normally look out for ourselves, protect ourselves, want to accomplish our aims, so too we should act towards others as their desire is exactly the same.
Oh yeah, tanda bado ngara chama. Ane so Geshe Yeshe nga se shen se da se de be geshe bo chigra shen se de yawar do shara da shen se ra ne kune ka so ra geshe she de che ni kyo thong ma me ba ne rang geshe she ni ra geshe she rang geshe she ni te tanda le shal chawa chi rang tanda tu le shal chawa che ya da no che to kanga yong go resto go re ro kyo thong ma me ba na tanda ba do ra geshe she yong ba res ta geshe she ni kanga she tung ne she tawa tu ye rang geshe she ka le kem yong go re te ti tanda le shal chawa chi ne ba chen tanda ba do ko kyam chi te ba resto go ra rā kē chēshū chēni, lēgā chēni kē chēmbu chēshū yāgā chāyā yu nē, tā chū tē yāgshū tē chā gu rā, yāgshū sī gyur gu rā, tē gyur gu mē duwa. Mō tē dē, tā tēndē mā rē sē, tā bē samlū chabu kia gu tō sōng gu yā rē. Tā dā bā dō rā kē chēshū chē shēn yā wā rā dō shā wā tē mē mbā chē. Tā shēn kē chēshū chē rā yā wā rā dō gu rā chē, rā shēn dā gā tō chūng kē chē. Rwa tanda bado soso keche buche shende rangi tanda pechu cheyare chuni chego sam pendora karilendo sam rangi tetun chuvele tichi yuwaton peche yuwara. Tende memba che ta shenji tanda le rangi kuyo kuru esa. Ta thoma memba na rangi keche shu jimba na shen ta shen keche shu jingi esa. Thoma memba na shen kari na yenga kiawa me sam yawar dosha yuwaton. meche bache karche ne che sam tewa yu na tungi ne kewa menga chishtuwa. Thoma meba ne shen yawar dowa na shen, ta soso yu sha, shen keche wachis. Thoma meba ne shen yawar do ne she rang solo mada rang keche mbumba chis, shen keche, ta ti samlo tingi chebu kiabu se gwara, ta shen che se gwara, ta da shen ki che waris. Ta da shen do che chawa, sanwe tamba che bar cha sungudwa. Tata shen de che ures, sawe tamba su chitan mi kanga semla drogu mara, nawala drogu mara to, lolo chugu marwa. Granda mi shenda cheni shenda kechewa karchen che use to jikden to da cheni chita chena, o ti nawala drogu mara, ti sawe tamba se. Kibu samlo che tombo tanga tomgen te zole ya, she shenda kanga la ma she sungura, ni chitan ne tekwa chimbe che te zo, chitan sanje chumden de yongda che sungu yo mare. Tenpa shi tanga kibu chungu tanga jingda tezu sungpa ma do. Tendu tekpa chenpo sanje ka ma ri chi jesi tende keche yungu wa do. O chize tata shendu che chawa samye tenpa chebar chas. Tangi kyun jese. Ta samlo kar tanga ursa ra cheba keche shu jimba de kyun kanga yongsa de te re sha samgu re sungu ra. Tangi kyun jese. Tangi kyun je shen la ya yunden chadwe shen cheba jimba de yunden kanga june yinba de samlo tanga re sungu ra. 당니 견제 신라 야 연대 자주 세제 신 제반 진바도 연대 탐제근 정고들의 샤섬 당니 견제 신 연대 자주시네 당진 용서 류아단 신라원의 공부하셔라 당진스는 디스캅스 당진의 라친진들 세워라 가담베 라마츠 로촌토츠나래 간사가 당진다 라친진이 냠도 명직버전에 만부송 그래 당진 용서 류아단 아시다 강사의 책이 당진 자만 라체 버지만 개시시에 대치부 거기 삼자 삼로 줘라 어디디 선거라 당지 조선인데 저 당진 요선 들어왔다 샬라완의 공부자 라친진 다돈 좀바데 통마매번에 깨시지는 정군데 다시 하셔서 당진 요선 동안다 샬라완의 공부자 셰제번 집el로데 다 공수 딜라레시 있어 답에 저버자고 좀 매제 삼로 거라에 저버자고 그랬어 tene yaga yongare tarbatan tamje kembatan ngondorame kombata yende tamje jongo tene yongure ese o tichi shana
So up until now, we have held ourselves, this I, as most important. We think about ourselves and really have this kind of self-cherishing attitude, this self-importance, and we dismiss others. So throughout the beginningless rebirths that we have taken, we have been pursuing this kind of aim of accomplishing our aims by holding ourselves as most important, by engaging in this kind of self-cherishing attitude. But really, all of our faults are coming from holding ourselves as most important in that way. We have been working to accomplish our own aims, but yet we are still here in samsara. We are still subject to cyclic existence. And so that kind of pursuit of our own aims through that self-cherishing attitude has not really gotten us anywhere. This is something that we need to change then. We need to exchange the normal way in which we cherish ourselves and hold ourselves as more important. We need to exchange that for holding others as important. And instead of sort of casting aside, not thinking of or dismissing others, we should do that with ourselves. Because again, we have sort of taken, if we look at where we have gotten since beginningless time, holding ourselves as more important and cherishing ourselves, we are still subject to the sufferings of samsara. And so we need to switch this way of thinking. Instead of holding ourselves as most important and trying to pursue our own aims, we should instead try to strive to work for the benefit of others. And in the way that we normally cast aside the needs of others, we should do so with a sort of self-cherishing attitude. And again, this is something that Shantideva describes as being kind of a practice which is done in secret. We aren't really proclaiming that we are doing this exchange of our self-cherishing for cherishing others in a way that we tell everybody in the world. This is something that is kind of against the way that things are normally done in the world. And the Buddha actually gave the Mahayana teachings in secret. He didn't give them to everybody. He taught the Dharma of the Four Noble Truths and that of the sort of being of small capacity and middling capacity in general. But this sort of, especially the practice of exchanging self and others, is really only for certain disciples. So as the Kadampa masters have explained again, we have, since beginningless time, had this self-cherishing attitude, but it never has gotten us to accomplish any of our aims. So rather than that, may we change this kind of attitude and instead develop this self-cherishing attitude, which is the source of all good qualities.
Oh yeah. Mo dati tashen nyamje sedwa. Da jinjin da da jinjin da shen yawar da lo ni chibu jagu yara da so samle nalia. Ti tashen chewale ya ne ke ni yore chere ke chesu ni yore chera. Lo di chongala ke ni che so gudwa. O chi kare sune nga se de da shen se de pe ngoni je rawan do tubare chi wande samlo ko do so goda. Da shen do che de nga se do rawan chi rangxin ji ko yo tengere chi shen su de ya shen be rangxin ne tu tengere samlo ko yo res ina tende ke mare song yo da so su chi bo ge nga sam ge yo mi shen da chu shen se ya wa do se ti ta te yo wa mi shen da zu ra shen se de ra sa da shen se de paru churi na shi re paru de ri pa jo de ge de nga ju ri churi res ri pa jo be paru re se ra 다 파조 되게 미도저 고랑주에서 그랬던 간주 처리를 건조 파리를 시기도 어디나 신 소속의 지부 나아가요 건조 신의 섬도 신수도 개천종리 섬을 거기도 라스도 또 백개 신부를 섬을 거기도 어디나 신다 미파조도 저 섬을 따나 아주 신의 되어라 그거나 양 신다 상만 탐제게 신다 심제 탐제도들 신의 되어라 나 생각 자신부터 되어 말해 어디 인도자고 다다 신세대 ngombo sebo na shi kadu ina ngombo ra te sebo ra tenge na shi mare se samlo tanjo ga chane da da shen se de ko tu tu de pari churi na shi re se songo 당부 알레 계라 다다 신세 데 시보제 다세 라와 치 신생게 라와 치 가디 이나 tin데 소소소 카가 임보지 삼도 때 말을 뚜루레 티 삼로 치 코그레 선거라 되네 다게 대화이나 딩에 대화와 딩에 강에라 세고 그래서 데 건조 강에를 건조 동에를 건조 대화를 딩에 죽고 이렇게 매세 다게 디두텔이야 내 임베티 죽자 인사 개침부지거라 샹지 동에서 다 대화 두에들 개침부터 거란들 가리는 예수 소수된 점에 삼로고도 어디지 삼로도 돌고로 해셔라 되니 다게 임베 두밤 세월차스 대화도 두고를 강에도 세고를 니 샹지 임베 고 대화이나 거란 전쟁아 개박해매 어떤지 삼로도 어떤이 봐 개체수에 되니 봐 노루 땅고를 림베 총으로 땅에 아니 딱신세 오래 속도 야
So here, there are two kind of main obstacles to us embracing this kind of exchange of self and other, exchanging our self-cherishing attitude and our kind of casting away of others for an embrace of this attitude which cherishes others and kind of dismisses ourself. So one of the main obstacles is holding this self, this I, as being like autonomously established, as not being dependent or contingent upon anything else, being set up from its own side. So in the way that we look at this I or this me, the self, and then we think about others, both of those appear to have some kind of like real existence from their own side, have some sort of autonomy, whereas really these things are contingently designated. So when we have like this mountain here and that mountain over there, those things are always relative. If you are the one standing here, then that mountain is over there. But for the person on that mountain, that is the here for them. And so too it is with our sort of attitude about a self. For every single being, they each have an individual sense of I, this sense of self, and we hold that self to be important, whereas others are kind of insignificant. And so when we look at it from our perspective, we hold ourselves as being important and others as insignificant, but from their perspective, their self is important and others are insignificant. And it all really depends upon where we are looking from, our way of thinking. It's not something like blue and yellow, where those are blue and yellow regardless of what else there is. Here, this is something which is contingent, where we have like this and that, here and there. And that is the way that we look at the self and other. And so in this way, we kind of think of ourself as being distinct from others, set up from its own side, and really this I, without having to depend upon others or in any way be designated contingent upon anything. And along with that, we then think, oh, this is my happiness and my suffering, and that is their happiness and their suffering. There's sort of no connection between those things. We think of them as being like distinct and separate, theirs and ours. But really, once we begin to break that down, we can then exchange these kinds of attitudes and sequentially over time develop such that we get rid of our self-cherishing attitude and develop an attitude of cherishing others.
this is good. Lama chubena sungudwa. Rani cheber jimbe chonglen this. Tandabado ranke cheshu debate. Me chongle yoga nasa yoga legacy de chimetunga shora. Pesobutanda on the megasi, Namjune not the garage. Chongle Sigatolia. Rani chebens and be chongle, ranchi, ranke cheshu, ranke cheshu, yatini, rangananke cheshu, rangi chulu inanda rangi lungbe nanda te ke chishu te shandala neba chene che karchene che peba chidwa o te ta kyo kangen junggu dire sungora chongne na shiri mi lega chongne yunga de lega lap chimbu che tu ma te na shi shenben ki chawa lap chimbu chimbu tu ati te de sungora rangi cheben jimbe chongne des mendo tungwe kebe kyutunes mendo be tungwe kebe kyut sangma de tungwe kanga teleten kigora rangda rangso rang nangsa rangi lungba rangi chilu rangi chiji se tiba ka chishu che ni shandala neba ke ata ti yungu warto se ti sonda ni chawalap chenpu tuk tuku ma re sungu wara rangi cheben jimbe chongne de mendo tungwe kebe kyur sune rangla doba menge tungwe sangma tamje ke kyuti ti yinba da hakuwa chene sungu wara sheba chene se rangi cheben jimbe chongne de mendo tungwe kyur lele tela sta tanda bado kya thongma me bane ra chinjin de ra kya sheji che chore ta ra chinjin de pa tare soje kera meche ko je chenga changma de kera yis nga tanda bado phung chongge de kera yis kera nga cheban jimbe ke chembu tinde maji be yena shen ke chembu chebe na nga ta jo sangje na sangje chomde den gyur sagre chanju samba sa thombo lep sagre sigora rangi chebe jo mende doje lele delas lele kyo kanga chinge de kera de do ase nema mashe nga phung change kyo kanga yo jo kera de do ase lele chela khondo sonje kunjin je da te kinga ra chinji te ya mendo lo te ya mendo sam kunjin chen kera nge mane tinde che do ta tanda bodo nga phung change de kera de do ase kunjin se ra tinde chen so ra ta chanda kanto den chune mende dunga jo lele de kunja 당시 전신 좀 받친지로 서도 아체자 라친지데 가제 있는 남산 상만 매서 서고 말이데 뇨르 나야 탑시 쳐오라 총 나야 탑시 쳐고야라 뜻이 뭐야
So, likewise, as it is said in the Guru Puja, there is a verse which says that this chronic disease of cherishing ourselves is the cause giving rise to our unsought suffering. Perceiving this, we seek your blessings to blame, begrudge, and destroy the monstrous demon of selfishness. So here, this kind of self-cherishing attitude is like a chronic disease that we have. It has been with us since beginningless rebirths, and we hold ourselves to be most important, whether it is like thinking about our ourself and our country, our place. We have this strong self-cherishing attitude, and it keeps us from being able to really do any great real benefit for other sentient beings. This attitude of thinking mine and having this strong self-cherishing only causes harm. It only acts as a kind of hindrance to being able to benefit others. And it's also, as it says here, the cause giving rise to our unsought suffering. So we need to recognize that although we think we are benefiting ourselves with this cherishing, we're actually acting in a way that just causes harm. Since beginningless time, we have been taking rebirth, and we have been holding this kind of I as super important, as extra important, and working for that benefit. But yet here we are still cycling within samsara. And so we recognize that this is really the source of our problems. As it says, perceiving this, we seek your blessings to blame, begrudge, and destroy this monstrous demon of selfishness. Recognizing that this self-cherishing attitude is really what has hindered us. We think, well, if it weren't for this, I could already be a Buddha. I could be high up on the Bodhisattva paths if I had gotten rid of this. And so this, where we say like begrudge it, it's really recognizing that this is the source of our faults. This is something that is not good, and we're not going to let it increase anymore. We see the fault in this kind of attitude. Now, self-cherishing is not something that we can just poof, get rid of all in one instance, but sequentially, slowly, over time, we can reduce the force and finally extricate ourselves from this kind of attitude that really acts as the source of all of our suffering.
Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe yunde sangma jungde yinba ti she ku res Ngoji Sanji de Chanju Samba Sama Tamjiki, Shenzo Jin Tanda Sanji Ora. Ranga Raju Ransa Geshe Yeshe in the Tandaba the Kwako Tanda Dinashita Mambana Kwashi Kote Redorma. Oh, the Indukasa. Mando said Chiba Ranga Tansi, Tuan Shanji Tanjaba, Diniki Kabatose, Sanjay from the Sanjay to Sanjay the Chanju Samba Sanjay the Kada. Shenzo Jin, Shendu Jin, Raletan, Shen. Just all things Sanjera. Rant and the letter Karis, Ranke Shishuchi, Diwang Toma Mevana Koder, and the Koder or Sungua. Yeah.
So here, then it continues saying that in brief, infantile beings labor only for their own end, while Buddhas work solely for the welfare of others. With a mind understanding the distinctions between the failings of one and the advantages of the other, we seek your blessings to enable us to equalize and exchange ourselves and others. So here, it's really, and also in Shantideva's text, he says, well, what need is there for any kind of lengthy explanation here? Us childish beings, those of us who are pursuing our kind of self-cherishing attitude, we look out for ourselves, but look where we are. We're still cycling in samsara, whereas Buddhas labor for the good of others. See the difference that divides them. We could be progressing on the paths. We could be making that kind of progress, but it's really our self-cherishing attitude that holds us back. There's no need to say a lot about this. Us sort of infantile beings are working for ourselves, but not really getting anywhere. Whereas Buddhas, bodhisattvas, working for the benefit of others with this self-cherishing attitude, they develop these qualities.
Oh, yeah, this one's a Tanya Kera Karsura. Tandi Mode, that didn't Rachin Kisambanashi, Rake Shimbumachi, Shanky, Chishin, Shanky Tanda Truvia, Kyobunashi Pakurgi in Sungura. Dagi Shanapa, Puranashi, Yobul Patanashi, Simjat and the Patagi in Sungura. That's somebody go much, do some matches on the odd thing I did the chetum when the Masam go a Masam Shoshapus, Ning do Gage, Dash and do troops, Nimanashi Machi, Dash and do troops. Nikera Shangi Tandal Park, Shandy Throats and get your Masabina, Keranga, Nimanashi, Anya, Yida, Tundri, Kitchen in the Shasiva, Ranchilia. Dagi Simji Shangi Tandala Makuna, Lania Chunga, Neve, Neva Yida Tundul, so never landed to the Drag Tapsi Dose, touch each of the Sungura. Oh, did you love Indigo?
So here we should exchange this kind of attitude of holding ourselves, cherishing ourselves as most important, and instead develop a kind of attitude of cherishing others, become like a servant for others, working for the benefit of others. So here we shouldn't kind of become despondent at this or become depressed at this, but recognize, well, we can decide to continue with our self-cherishing attitude and allow that to take us to the lower realms, go to the become a hell being or a hungry ghost and so forth. Or we can change that. We can exchange our self-cherishing for an attitude that really cherishes others. And in that way, develop good qualities. So this is the kind of sort of a question that we have for ourselves.
Oh, yeah, that in the odd data, Shangam Jokon, some kids to tell ya. So Pama Yimbata, Cutting Simple Yimbata, and some Tangi Mare. Razulu Legend, some Charlie order, Socialization, that case, the cup of Yongu Arganzo. Social data of Shinachi, Shandala, Adjective, social, Lura Tanji, Pajo, Robert, Low Langi, changes on the order. Oti ya Kakin, ya Chefshire, and the mature time, and that's you are no. Otis on that to do. Teaching Buyamba, Pada Mada, to do some local Yamare. Garazul something or made to a tons on the social media, but the Maimba Samlo Pago, the color of what you lochi, Kigdo, something changes on you order. Or they are Kakis, Sukshambu, so a Tapsi, you are no. Oh, do Karsoda. Oh, not that and that. Tanda de Lord Junde Manga, Tende on the summertime, the Rangat Dinasi. Kadi Chimbures, Tishanda, Kyongamache, Ran Tinchimbo Yimbatan, Rala Chinita, Tindeshan and Samlutani, Zawa Kumgudua, Chamba Kumgudua, teacher to Sanje Kobanton to Kigudua. Tanda Tinde membership, Tinde Samlumadanaya. Chitania could devandula Tungem and the Baranda Chiba, Kangal, Tewaku, Kangal, Tungem, Teku, some Susunang Yabuku, Shanda, Yabuku, Samsa, Susulumba Yabuku, Shanda, Lumba Yabuku, Samsa, Tinde Samdangiora. Ranchinji said, Susu Chayamara, Susunangme, Susu Chilu, Susu Lumba, Susu Tessens, Kangal Pachayaton, Tezu Kangalega, Jinga Michigiora. Me chigoto chiso kandichi lega na oti kabiti samle le buche gore sungoto o te lu ka soda o te ji jona andi digmeto tanda ka le bada o ya te sonda nangbe che delia to naga mambo yora kibu chungu che doa ran kibu chungu che je tup tata tup tugune te tumne de yore jing dan chambo samlo ko ma tumne de yore Digore Siduza Maton Sigo Marwa. Nakibun drink is some cotton gation, Takshala Soba Chakta Mabat and this some cotton till Changine till Changura. Kibu Chambane Rale Shanda Kesho Chegudwa. Take Karina Sosa Karinuna teacher Urdo. It is Shanda Rangazu type shed you can share your Tensalo Suru and Emanet in the Mara. Koralola Chuchu, the Kuchet of you, the Cheshegora. This on the take by Chimbuchu, the young Dutch, Songo Mar Sanjegi. Sang Tambache Chas and Nashing. Me Lola Chu Tunget to the Shema, the Lord Major Kerala Mission da Kesha or the Sun, with the young body cigarette, car cigarette. My socially cook Kesha, Karsa Cigarra. Sana ko Kanga shares a mother. That in Sanko Kangal Sheshagra. Sanga in a Kangal Shesh, you Kangal Sheshagra. I take Arsaverson, Taxation a Yagres, Colota is still all Majubi in a could you turn up Pachaya was a shag the Mount Bodhicitta could take Pachaya Yase and the Yagadro cigarettes on Gade. Nego could lock down the Kiati Yagu do some in a Kayo Marquam such a lotion and some Tindo Kangason Shagor, you read the Ina Naranjo Sosos and Mone. Karele Karina Nabe Sanji Chumdin de Sonship of the Karaka on the Tisosula. Mala to Yabu do that and then it's to Medusa, Lota Macha, and I Kalikali to the Chetum, Yabu do awesome. Tandang Chetu Matama, when it in this simple new to change power cigarette, change symbol power cigarette. Power gonna power what tip out the cigarette, change sempas, power cigarette. Narazu misses on the power in cigarette. Miss and power game, mother cigarette. Condre Shawan the Junior Sim Rangshin to Manayoso Bozo say you are Sigura. Till Pao Sigura Mare. Till them that and get a churnach and the Sigura, or Tisonda, Chanju Samba, Samba Chambos, Pao said, and one Pao Ningdum. Keep you said, Narazo Kansali, we were loaded with said, Sel Sigura, Ningdum Sugrab Jora, said, and Nevada, what you should, Yakshud carry Shambenche at the Resigura. Shambenche at the Ningdum, Tatili have a Kanga. Tasura, Yimiki Gushi Mado, Kose, some Jenny Pao Kemaro, Kokora Shinga Jan Resigora, Tiran Loka Nearly 7 6 Mado, Kokora Shin to get it, Telepao Kesigmare, or Tatis Lam Dixamando.
So here then, in developing bodhicitta through the kind of mind training of exchanging self and other, again, exchanging this self-cherishing attitude for an attitude of cherishing others, we don't really focus on or contemplate as much the kind of connection that we have with others in terms of their having benefited us in the past, their having acted as, say, our mothers and how they have helped us and so forth. So here, if we think about the kind of way of training the mind in the sevenfold cause and effect, one is thinking of all sentient beings as having been one's mother and recalling their kindness and the wish to repay that kindness. But here, this is kind of an understanding that is really based upon just recognizing that we are equal to others in the desire to have happiness and the desire not to suffer. And we can see that sometimes this kind of attitude naturally will arise for us. We have a wish to benefit another being. We see them suffering, say, and we want to help alleviate their suffering without any sort of thought of, oh, they benefited me in the past, or they're my friend or relative. We can see that sometimes this kind of attitude arises where we really just recognize that the other being is a person who experiences this desire to have happiness and a desire not to suffer. And so without contemplating the previous kindness, without thinking about the sort of relationship to you, it's something where we really are recognizing that that other being just wants to have happiness and doesn't want to suffer for their own sort of a benefit. So here, again, when we're doing the sevenfold cause and effect method, it's really contemplating that kindness that was shown to you. And this wish to attain Buddhahood comes out of the desire to repay that kindness. But this is really something wherein the equalizing and exchanging of self and others, it's really not just about contemplating their kindness toward you, but just recognizing that fundamental sort of basic thought that we all have. So again, this is something where was not necessarily taught to everybody. In Shantideva's text, it's referred to as sort of like the sacred secret or sacred mystery. It's something wherein we don't expect everybody to be able to do this immediately. In Buddhism, we talk about the sort of teachings for the being of small capacity and the being of middling capacity, and then get into that of the being of great capacity. But we should do what we are able to do. We actually need to do what accords with our abilities. Now, in the past, it was the case that we wouldn't really have taught the Mahayana teachings widely because they were really taught specifically for those disciples who were ready, who were good receptacles for those teachings. And so here, I mean, if we were to go out in the world and try to tell everybody, don't think of yourself, you need to think of others, they would think you're crazy, really, to just think of others only above yourself. So, I mean, these days, the tradition has kind of changed, wherein teachers give all kinds of teachings, all of the various levels of Tantra and the Mahayana teachings and so forth, with this sort of attitude that at least they're putting down imprints. Now, there's sometimes the danger of disciples giving rise to wrong views regarding these teachings, but sometimes that's sort of dismissed in that, well, these imprints will allow someone to be able to realize that in the future, even if they have some sort of wrong view now. But here, no matter what kind of teachings we hear, if we are not yet able to practice it ourselves, we should still try to think, you know, that's an impressive sort of teaching. That's something that I hope to be able to do in the future, even recognizing if it's something that we can't do now. So we should try not to have any kind of wrong view saying like, oh, that's impossible or something like that, but recognize that there are some things that maybe are not in our capacity yet. When we talk about a bodhisattva, the actual term in the Tibetan involves this syllable that means hero. And usually when we talk about a hero, we're talking about somebody that's, say, maybe very courageous in battle and kills lots of people, but that's not a real hero. A real hero is a bodhisattva, the one with this kind of skill in means to be able to lead others. And so recognizing that maybe we're not yet at that point where we can train in all of those things, we should appreciate the kind of imprints that they lay down, but also try not to give rise to wrong view regarding those sorts of teachings. A real hero, you know, a bodhisattva, it takes a lot to become that. The sort of a worldly hero, as Shantideva says, is just killing the dead. That's not really someone we should look up to.
Oh yeah, well, that thing I do got so that. 시당이라도 정말 고민이 미기에 초다 텐들고 통마면에 검대자 디숙체요도 디아 디바 망쳐와도 가르사그래서 심장을 때문에 디바 망쳐사요데 가두이네 겨와 가두이네 심장도 디체고요도 텐들케베이나 데밀케베이나 지소던데네 누구요도 어다 디디체줄네 심체다 소체야다 네 가서 차도체다 가가 용거다 대바 망쳐와 대가라도 심장을 때는 싸기오라 심장을 차와시네 나바시네 전제토네니 대바 망쳐 싸기오래 대바 따야 그 대바 상마데 섭치수 상마데 심장을 때는 사기요데 다 티바 다에 던달이야 심장을 때는 티바 다고요라 대다고도 심장을 잠바다 자와다 딱배 셰집에 자주 섬라서 어떤데 섬로 좀 많이 받은 강한 쇼김하고 나 매버럽 셰자 angone 텐데 따고야 레셔섬 텐데 따토 지금 섬자 섬베네 빼대고 마음부 다고요래 심장을 차와제는 티바 마음부 사고요라 가지이나 텐데 단데 차와 매버체 딱배 셰집 벌써 잠바다 닝지도 동에 트레나 섬 떠와단 데나 섬 매바제 장가라서 나달로 좀 많이 버찬 주선 번호신 강한 쇼기티에 되는 거 말도 콩드당아제다 차도도 있는 강한 쇼기티도 왔을 좀 많이 버스게 쪼고면 도와 미치기 럽선 남산 콘드사기도 말도 당에 콘드사기 상깔에 좀 당에 콘드사기인데서 밖에 쏘고 말해 강한 쇼기티에 온 거래 좀 많이 버스게 왔도 어째서 잠바닝지 자주 semla 봐 좀 많이 버당보니 기기 오마데 코츠와 제제 매바 제제 텐데 깨투가 지금 삼삼마온 바나 단데 토고 멘도데 삼제 텐데 삼로 참보이나 틱바 다발라 tak섭 셰셰데 초도 주르바데 어디 심제 샹리아 참바다 니지 찬주고 semla 소바 펜바 투베 초아방에 펜바 투베 데데요라 텐데 티고 찬주 sembe 단다 찬주 sem비 펜셰베 진주고 고데 치카 치제 카셰카실랍게 야야
So generally in life, we have a strong kind of habituation to non-virtuous, non-virtues and afflictive minds. We're really able to sort of give rise to these things without any kind of any kind of like effort on our part. We do most of our non-virtuous actions as well in relation to other sentient beings. So whether it's having a kind of malicious attitude, killing others, jealousy, stealing, and so forth. Most all of the harm that we do when we do non-virtuous actions is toward other sentient beings. And so in order to kind of purify that harm that we have done to others, purify those non-virtues done in relation to sentient beings, the best way to kind of purify that is by training the mind in love and compassion and bodhicitta and wanting to benefit others. So even if we're not yet able to have this kind of uncontrived, naturally arising compassion and love, bodhicitta, toward other sentient beings, this is something that we begin by first sort of fabricating, making our minds go in that direction. When it comes toward things like anger, we don't ever really have to think about getting angry. It doesn't take effort on our part. When someone does something that provokes us, we don't have to think, oh, I'm going to get angry. It just arises. It just happens. And so too, we can get that way through time with our love and compassion and bodhicitta. So the supreme way of purifying the kind of harms and non-virtues that we have accumulated in relation to sentient beings is actually through developing love and compassion and this sort of attitude of non-harming. And so we'll go through in the first chapter of Shantideva's text, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. The first chapter describes some of the benefits, including this incredible ability to purify our negativities.
Oh yeah, that is change stress on good. When a pitch and a song good. Oh, Penachana got a sour drop chair and a chabata roches and Nagun chase, timber mambo tips, Chansanga, near the Mutin de Teora. Oh, she the chamo minatin room. Remember Napo Chepe, timber mambo tin and out on doja tegra. That take a chabatan do and the Chiperulo Lord of Tosto Tiagra. Mangsha Dangaranzo, Chansanga de timber mambo tips and Nagun chabatan do and the Today, the nation Napo Mancha, the Nazo Tiba Mancha Sante Yoresongara. The Tardoco, Minium Dodos on the Kanekation, Assembly Samultana, Luce Betone, Millionaire at the Semjel at the Mancha, Nambuche, Tibadio, Changanchi, Timber Mambo Tips, Penatomi, Satavana, Shivitina Unashi, Tiba Nabotina, Shisagio, Resongara. And then sometimes the law to Urwa, Namgalia. Lawyer ban a law basona, Kechi and got the Lumbakanga savages Tungura, Kechi, choose or dinner, she declares our Teresora. Kewa chawa ngemane to de te paksha ke wangi sam samliya samlo kogor kewa che samlo. O ti kar so lo jab du sa ane na ti jide kam da se ka so lungba du ka ga sebo si to zranga thuk si ji tong do o ti na se re so go ra. O se chamone lo ju bi. Ti ta na se sanje somden de Sanje chumden de la sobo ngame sanje de chanju sambatin de tone chere je tone te paksha ge wange sam la kewa che ga samlo do chunju lo jo na shinge seve ran shinje yaga ji to so ke ge re chara ti shi sanje to kalam na ji de sunam lo do tanga chung so do o tinde yong ge re so go da te so da ngaran jo chi da pe de kewa nyam chung kewa de pe nyam chung jong de Shukchunjore. Tikba de pe top chambore, Kewa de Nyamchunju Kuksere, de Lord Juni Sabu Kechi Chuna Shere. Tikba Saya de Chanchanga Tene Nabuche Natumi Devana Shere. Tete Kewa Nyamchunre, Tikba top chambore. Te ane Nami, Tikba top chamber number member Nyawa Yeda Tundula Kia, Soya Meber Tende Yore, Tikba Mambo Sashore, Nami Mambo Yore. Tikba doje shindu mesaba. O tezu changma de pan jom go yo na tikba ta yo wa. Tikba de pa ta go yo na ta chanju sem da chamba da ning ji kom chanju sem kom ba le lag ba chi ge tikba ta ya thapsi shenda me sung go ra. Teni chokwe chanju sem me ba keshen kang ge sigi number jo sa. Ke wa shenda kang ge sigi no to gu ma ra kon jom to gu ma re sung go ra. O te de chamba da chawa chanju sem la sok ba tezu kom ge na ngaran zu tikba mambu sa tenge kewa thongma me bane kewa nyam chunju yenge tezolia ta tikba chomya da kewa phe to da thap tile la bo yo ma re so gdo ya ode.
So here, as it says in the first chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva says that he gives this example, really, that's sort of a very vivid example, saying that just as on a dark night, black with clouds, the sudden lightning glares and all is clearly shown. Likewise, rarely, through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts rise, brief and transient in the world. And so if we can imagine like a really dark night where there's lots of cloud cover, it's very sort of like this thick darkness, maybe raining some. And this kind of represents our ordinary way of acting in the world. Our speech, our sort of comportment of ourselves tends to be pretty much non-virtuous. Our ordinary way of acting is strongly non-virtuous. And so whether we're speaking or whatever it is, that sort of tends to be our normal pattern. Well, like a flash of lightning on that in that dark night where everything is illuminated for just a moment, it says, likewise, rarely through the Buddha's power, virtuous thoughts arise. And so in the way that like on a really dark and stormy night, we have a flash of lightning that illuminates the whole, say, area for just a moment, just a brief transient second. This is like due to the imprints of the Buddha, of having heard the teachings in previous lives and so forth. We have these imprints of virtue that can from time to time arise, very sort of seldom, and are much weaker in relation to our kind of non-virtuous thoughts. So generally, we tend to be a lot weaker in our virtue. We are much more habituated to non-virtue. And it's really, again, like this sort of dark and long night. Most of our time is spent in non-virtue. In countless rebirths, we have sort of been acting in this way and creating the kinds of negative actions that will lead to ripening births in the hells and so forth. And so as it continues into the next verse, Shantideva says, well, virtue thus is weak, and always evil is of great and overwhelming strength. That's our sort of normal course of things. Except for perfect bodhicitta, what other virtue is there that can lay it low? So if we need a method for dealing with this kind of situation in which we are very much overpowered by our non-virtues, and our virtue is very weak, it's very sort of sporadic and less powerful, the most efficacious auspicious kind of method that we can use is developing this attitude of bodhicitta. It's the most powerful kind of positive, virtuous thought that is able to oppress or overcome that kind of great non-virtue, the store of non-virtue. So except for this attitude of bodhicitta, there's nothing really powerful enough to purify those negativities that we've accumulated in countless previous lives.
Oh yeah, that's the word, yeah. Keba Mambol Sungurdo. Oh, no, you Sanje the Chanju Samba Namji, Sanje Namji Sungurdo. Keba Mambolia, that's Simjanda, Randa Shen, Simjan Tamjolia, Pembe Tap Choto Juba the Kari Yamdo. Ribe Namjo Guyane, Yando Cheba Shene, Tosam Shene, Tosam Shidu Sigurdo. Oh, Tene Kari Choto Juba Severesina, Samning Chanju Sam Company, Chanju Sam Company, Ne Simjan Namji, Randa Simjan Namlia, Pembe Choto Juba. Rally in a dress, Simjan Nam the Pembe Choto Juba, Severation Gurdo. Kebatuma, Rabun Jaba, Tuanam, Dini Pember Sisogua. They died at Dele Laboyomar, Casital Shedunganjo, Chanju Ninji Chamber, the Zoy Seswa, Shanda Samlamata, Ninji Chamber Com Seswa, Tene Chamba Com Seswa, Tene Chanju Sem Congora, Tene Aya Donane, Tibataya the Sanja Coban to be Shandu to a Conga Teleton Yongua, or thing in the Kebatuma Rabun Jaba is the Pember Choto Tubacari, some tended to some shene. But the Kimberes of Gora, Tuanam Gindi, Pember says, Dini Semi Kirisonam Giteso Telanibo, Chanju Sem Combolatane, Shambia Trubne, Tame be Sim Gentezogene, Tarba the Tamje Chambola Soba, Teveso to Cubatini, Kirisonam Giteso Telani to Tobacho, or Teveso, Tarba Tamje Chambola Soba, Le Labucheche. Shiribala Soba, Tezuka, Lucale, Tembala Soba, Meshik Suba, Mesha, Nimapo, Tende, Kale, Kamagoba. Now, Bed Tambachigine, Shandu to wait in one in so Kabu, Kasha Toshaton, Shandu to Edwa. Tenet, Tower and Doala, Semi Sushi, Kilu, you so that Julia. The lamb down at Tawandre. Sobol Kangite, Gomare, Megate Gomare, or Teniti Taputo Gomare. Tikba Tayachi to Sobokangas and the Tindechego Maris, Tikba de Kale and the Tagmari, Chulitrin, the Tagmaris and Gora, Samba Sambuch and the Samba Nambach and the Tikba Sagur, Tele Samba Sambuch and the Tikba hours and Gorno. Oh, Tisonda. Oh, gosh. Toanam getting Pembas and didn't send me years on them get the Jotelani to Tobaris, or teach you, yeah, Ramna.
So here, then, the most powerful kind of supreme method for purifying our negativities is this attitude of bodhicitta, love and compassion. So continuing with the next verse, it says, for many eons, deeply pondering, the mighty sages saw its benefits, the benefits of bodhicitta, whereby unnumbered multitudes are brought with ease to supreme joy. So here, those who have gained supreme enlightenment have contemplated and have through their intelligence determined that this attitude of bodhicitta is the most powerful kind of method for purifying our negativities and also for bringing others to this state of supreme joy. There's nothing superior to that. So here, again, this is something where we aren't able to give rise to this immediately, but rather in stages, we can over time generate this kind of attitude. So if we want to bring benefit, supreme benefit to sentient beings, this is really bringing them liberation and the state of omniscience. This sort of attitude is something that brings about that benefit, both for ourselves and others. And one is able to do this in a way where you aren't sort of subject to suffering, subject to austerities to be able to get to that point, but rather bodhisattvas travel the path going from joy to joy. So when we are engaged in our non-virtuous kinds of attitudes, we have these negative minds, we have these things that create suffering, but bodhisattvas really are developing good minds, developing positive minds, minds in such a way that working for the benefit of beings is something that they take on willingly and joyfully. And so it's actually, as it says here, whereby unnumbered multitudes are brought with ease to supreme joy. So although, yes, we need to make effort at it, it's not like something wherein we are subjecting ourselves to terrible austerities, but rather it is a joyful kind of a path.
Oh, yeah. That's what the Sibe Tunga Jada Shom Dojin Singidua. Oh, Siba, Kibu drink double lo chang the Sigada. Kibu drink cups of lo changi or lo changbe. And then Siba Koe Tunga Lada Mi Tunga Soba, so Tunga Soba Tamje, Changban de Tunga Tarban Dugo, Sibe Tunga Jada Shom Dojis. Simjam Medesa, the Chanju Sembe, Tuba Chambers, Chanju, Kibu Chamber, Lama lo changi. Lo Changberoa, Sweto Johnson. Simjam Medesa, Simjangi Medoa, Tungi to the Samjepa, Seven de Batazuki, no. Simjam Medesa. The my Jata Seven Dubatan said, Tawa, Mondo Nele, Tawa Jata Mambo, Kawane Kawa Cutie, Mondo Lami Koban Cune, any type of Tamja Chamber, Tarba Troop, the concert, the Sukan Sigurno. The my Jata Seven Dubata. Chanju Sem de Majiba Kiba Segure. Given the Mayamba says, Madame says, Zintoba Segure, Chanju sing it out to Tom Machasungua. Or Tanti Narazu, Kibichung de Gina. Want to have a milk over to a Sochigora Tanda. Shall saw upon yes or some gift to me pang besito. And it make you a choosing nearing message Nalapa, Kawachu to Chimbata, Sabacom, or Tene, Kibichungu Lamso Changura. Yinayako, or Kibu drinking. Tata Shen Chakta Meba, Yamoto to Payate, Abude Tia some Kibushimbu, Chanju, some Chambala, so what is a comedy Abude Mamba and teaching some Tanda Samutagora, or Tis Samutana, and it were Mabutaj and Mambalia, Tindichi, Ungurton, Pasha Gurno, or this Lamna Sibe to make a dash from the Simjim Medesa on Dubana. The Mike Jada Chever and Dubagan, Chanju Semye, Tata Tamachas. Champagne Chanju similar so Maji Keba the Maniam Bashe, Kona Kondo Pea Mato Yamachu Sungura, Tangi Omar Sungure Sungura. Touch Gemma Maimba Kena in the Gemma Maimba Azul Majina, Surgetile, Tapsi and Kaduna Los Changore Sungura teacher.
So then it continues, those who wish to crush the many sorrows of existence, who wish to quell the pain of living beings, who wish to have experience of a myriad joys, should never turn away from bodhicitta. So here, contemplating then that what the sort of contemplation for the being of middling capacity, recognizing the kind of sorrows of existence, not just wishing for a rebirth as a human or a god, but really wanting to get out of this kind of suffering cycle of existence. And then who wish to quell the pain of living beings, going on to the sort of contemplation of the being of great capacity, recognizing that one wishes to be able to benefit other sentient beings, then who wish to have experience of a myriad joys. So again, here, when one progresses along this path, going from good rebirth to finally that state of omniscience and Buddhahood, this is the way in which one progresses sort of joyfully through those various paths. So those who wish for that should never turn away from bodhicitta. So here, again, going back to the contemplation or the sort of trainings for the being of the small scope, a being of small scope recognizes that in order to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god in a future life, they need to give up non-virtuous actions, give up harming others, and engage in positive virtuous actions. And so here, even if that's the kind of level of training that one is at, one should have a kind of respect and admiration for the trainings of a being of middling capacity, one who is trying to get out of this cycle of existence, as well as one who is striving in the Mahayana trainings, trying to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so this kind of even if we are not yet able to fully develop these trainings for ourselves, say not yet able to fully give rise to an uncontrived kind of bodhicitta, we should strive to generate that sort of attitude, whether it's by putting down kind of imprints, having this kind of respect for it. We need to also, as we often say in the prayer, that where we have not generated bodhicitta, may it arise, and where it has arisen, may it not decline, but only grow more and more. This is the kind of way in which we should hold bodhicitta as being of supreme importance and never let it decline in any way. Whether we are able to sort of have an uncontrived natural experience of that, or yet are still at the point of having to kind of fabricate that or generate that, this is an important training to hold on to.
Oh yeah. That's just simply gonna catch it, said. Oh, they mean that then cabaret tops and Narazu double chickens. Chanju simply gonna catch it, Membata, Muslim than Jusim Sinisha and Bakasha. Simply Tamjik to Sanjay Koban, Toba George, Toba Show, some membership. Simply Tamjik to Sanjay Koban, Dark Toba Chagi, and it takes to Chanju Sambanam Jungun Tomba. Carolina Kazen Yamlis and I think that she is in Juba Simply Yoba. Oh, yeah. You the Chanju Simply Kunas and member Simply and Juba Simply Ranga the case on us go. Chanju Simply Kuna Kechi case. Tantangarazu Tabolo Chango is a China, and it's Chanju Sim Ran Gemma Maimba only the case on us go. Chanju Simply Kuna Kechi. Koyota Tambanyamta Namse. Narazu Tabo. Koyetsora leda nyumba wange kwa koro. Entando sosu kiuche. Sosu lenge basa sosu tunge nyang jitenge tandile sosu kiuche guara. Sosu tule chanke dile segura. Oh, that's a fine teacher. Oh yeah. Chanju simply gonna Kajira, Chanju member the Chanju Samaranzu de Bukansa Tameba, Kwa Kor, and the Society which a Kale Gabia, Chamba community con Chanju Semke Sonasungora, Chanju simply gonna Kajikis, Koetsora Tambe Yamta Namse, Maranzu de Koetsora Tam Denge, let a Yomu be Shawaja in Ge, Society, Tendechi Yina, Chanju Semlo Chanju simply case on Asura. Koetsora Tambe, Yamtak to Jerbangaranzo, Kwako de Lenu Shaman said, Kishil Yomare, Chemakawadu and the Tendeke Yomare. One sometimes some Joko is ready or Sosoke Miduata, Kawakawadu Lekar Karsana. The Koetsora Tambe, Yamtanams, Yamtagba, Kansangaranzo Tabutis, Sem Kyokoba, Yamtawa, Ningis, Gomgosa. Koetsora Yamdana. The Shinam de Chanju, same place on the worship by Sesori, Kese Chanju Sambasigoda. Kawasigo Sanjel Sigo, Sanjel Samali Kawasigoda. This says the Garanzo, Kawa Jurgengita, Gotsu Sarwa, Chanju to same place on and the Sanjel Kovan Langbali Susarwa, Mazo Kawa Redora, Cheta Kavesesiguara. Chita Kiabu to Koran put to the Chimako, Kiabu Chivito, or didn't she say, Tante Kese said. Chanju to some case on Gaza, Java Sanjay from there, the double, Jago say you and take Kibul in your girl, take young guests on the Cases, Chanju Sambali, Cases, Mingdaguara. Chanju Sambik on the Kaji, Koyatam, Yamdanam, Teshinam, the Sash churches, Ming Kabar Jasigora, Tawarshik Baser, Taco, Sanjay Jurgengi Kansa, Samja Tamjak, Troop to Gengi, Chok to give a Kibu Jurgengi Kansa, Min Kabarja, Miss and a pause in Mington and Min Kabarja Kayo Mara, Kabarja getting Mara Shoina, Chunesichana, or the Monete, Paumonet in Kurguara, Gavesa, Chanju Sabas and Gage, Ningdu Changi Kansa, give you tell, give you new vessel cells of a Karina, Tangang Kansa Chaguara. Oh, Chanju Desenam, the says church as Min Kabarja Togri. Gesenam the says, Jiden Hamichebe Chachagos, Jiden Belhada me, Gazin the Sangbala Soba, Kandeji in what is a Sangmaga Chacha, Vesukur, your water. 가르스는 그 심지어 탐제기 던트부터 지금 있어 개번에 개번 깔이 때문에 생겨지 레사도 생기 던도랑 려당게 간사지 레사도 어때인데 현다 사창바자진을 써고 참하게 닝도 된데 깨 토고 말도 수에 깔이 가버도 어때선자 지대에 사창바자진을 써고 대다게 차저에서 그거를 시작라 그 던게 던게 찾아서 그러서 민다던 개발자식으로 지대 함일제에 찾아를 유로스 어디에도 나라도 벌써 저 단다게 만중게 지나던데 만중게 인삼도 말해서 거라 로장네 끼리나 뭐지 되네 사통불레송게도 둘이 개세천 주선바세도 아니 어때나 생각도 저거에서 콘조장장 개세천 주선바 말에 나라도 탐해 봐지네 나도 했더니 개세천 주선바게 민토부터 개발자 찾아서 그거 이제 차그래 송도와 어때서 자주 semda 잠반이 공부를 해서 거야. 야.
So here, should bodhicitta come to birth in those who suffer, chained in prisons of samsara, in that instant they are called the children of the blissful one, revered by all the world, by gods and humankind. So when one gives rise to bodhicitta, and first we have this kind of aspirational bodhicitta, wherein we aspire to gain the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. And then there is the aspirational bodhicitta, where we're engaged in the trainings necessary to do that. Someone like us, an ordinary being like us, who suffers, chained in the prisons of cyclic existence, if we are able to, by developing attitudes of compassion and love over a long time, training in those, if we are able to give rise to this kind of attitude of bodhicitta, then at that moment we are called children of the conquerors, or children of the Buddhas, and revered by all the world, by gods and humankind. So here, us as ordinary beings, we are in our ordinary lives kind of creating bad karma, and due to that karma we are then going to have to take rebirth, and there's no sort of certainty about that rebirth, as we are driven by our various afflictions and our karma. And so once we recognize this kind of situation of being in this prison of samsara and have generated this attitude of bodhicitta, in that instant, in that moment, one becomes like a child of the Buddha, like an heir to the Buddha. So we refer often to the Buddha as being like a victor or a king. And it is one who is following after in that same path by generating this attitude of bodhicitta that we refer to as a child of the victor, someone who will eventually sort of take on that role of embodying the state of Buddhahood, wherein one has removed all faults and developed all good qualities. And so upon generating this attitude in a kind of unfabricated way, we gain this sort of special name, this special title. This is also listed in the kind of benefits of bodhicitta in the Lam Rim, wherein one is referred to as being like an heir or a child of the Buddhas. And not only that, but one is like this real kind of hero, not just as a sort of a hero in the sense of being able to kill others, but a hero with the kind of special skills that are respected by others. So here, upon gaining such a special name, one takes up a position of being revered by all of the sort of worldly deities. They see you as being worthy of worship, Brahma and Indra and so forth, because you have this kind of strength of mind, this determination to benefit other sentient beings that is beyond their capacity. And so this, again, although describing sort of the kind of transformation that comes when one generates bodhicitta in an unfabricated, uncontrived kind of way, this is something that we should recognize is done by beings who are like us. If we begin training the mind in love and compassion, we are able to eventually generate bodhicitta, first in a kind of fabricated way, and then in an uncontrived kind of manner, becoming one who is like a child of the victors and so forth. And so this is, again, stressing the importance, the need of laying down these imprints, of really training the mind in love and compassion in order to gain these incredible benefits of bodhicitta.
Oh yeah, that is the Sinjurti number 2 was it. 다 세르 교지게 신주 지세 주베 요체라 뒤쪽선에 짜 된들 봐 수네 코 세르 교주요라 짜도 세르 교주요라 신주지 신주그 지천주지게 짜베 상동담만 뭐 세르 교주토게 요체라 신주지 남바서도 미장 륜들라네 개외고세 단단하라 좀 미장 류 세르 되게 풍부 나주 연계 세주 연계로 샤다르바 로아 침벌 소바 마체 망부드 된게 류디 탐메베 류디 승거라 미장 륜들라네 개외고 장주 셈공 장반인지 공부이나 단단하라 좀 세르 되게 풍부 류탄 직초초 미장의 랑시체 텐데 랑시 때어와 다 텐데 멤버체체 개외 꼴은 교토 그래서 거도 어제 랑시체로 나 차주 매게 다제 사고 매베 이 시기 랑시체게 텐데 톱 그래서 거다 신주지 넘버 초다 미장 류들라네 개외 고른제 린다 매바 교회네 장주 섬시 자와랍 대송세 장주 그 섬시 자와데 소소 마제 바퀴에 탑시체 그래 배수체 그래 근데 계속나 많이 바체 송고 그래서 단단한 줄 류탐에 반대되시 멤버십 상계의 류다고 가르소래 사정인이 풍부 많이 봐 상미기 풍부 개맹갱게 꿀루tin데 토비하게 류순 교토 그래서 그도 야 그래
So then this next verse describes bodhicitta as like the supreme substance of the alchemists. It takes our impure flesh and makes it the body of a Buddha, jewel beyond all price. Such is bodhicitta. Let us grasp it firmly. So we have this ordinary body of flesh and blood with all of our various organs, and sort of it's in the nature of being unclean with our lungs and our liver and all of these things. And it's subject to destruction. This body is such that it is going to disintegrate. It's momentarily disintegrating. And as opposed to that, when we are able to generate this attitude of bodhicitta such that we attain the state of Buddhahood, we gain this body that is in the nature of light, that is not like our ordinary, impure, unclean body. And so here, again, it's encouraging us to make effort at generating this attitude of bodhicitta in order to be able to gain such a state, the body of a Buddha, a jewel beyond all price. And so here, this is the kind of nature of bodhicitta, and recognizing its benefits, we should thus give rise to this attitude if we have not yet given rise to it. And we should make our effort to protect the bodhicitta that we have generated so far.
Oh yeah. 단지 질럽네 엄마도. 단지 개와 생고 출신 신도는 생겨도와. 개와 생고 출신 신도는 생겨도와. 개와 가랑 저 장주가 sem기 마심배 개와 지이나 출신기 동부 깨래 동부 나신 제부 렌지 지네. 깨라 렌지 존에네 고야 감도르도. 장주가 sem기 마심배 개와 건데 사비나 그 개와 된 제부나 밑에와 렌지 지네네 개와 된 너버 소사래. 양토에 개와 말도. 가르쳐 당가르서 몰라서 가르쳐 같이 줘서 진짜 담바송서 개와신 그 출신 신도니 살아 개와신 정말 자주가 생기 마신배 개와신 탐제서라 출신 깨래 동분나신 제부대 렌지 진사수네 제부 요마라 조사래서라 제부 출신 신도니 임무센도로 소라 개와신 그 출신 신도니 제부 개와신 그 출신 신도니 제부신의 세도 그래서 거라 개와신 그 출신 신도니 제부께네 세버기로 니시거라 세도 그래서 장주 sem비 출신 딱 벌어서 장주 그 sem비 출신 되세거라 대 제부대 소야제 요 말에 소소 개와제 사네 대sem제 탐제 같은도 상계의 고반 토비 교르지 삼고하셔버리나 상계 마토바도 개와데 야 펠리체 두르마도 나밀 가제 롱체나 조여요 말에 근데 상계의 고반 토비 체도랑 침벌했다 어디 침벌도 어디 상계의 고반 토비 심제 탐제 같은 좀 상계의 고반 토비 교르지 양고하체 아니 니르니르 tweesom도 사버랑게 계속 상모 상계의 고반 토비 체도 고기에서나 손남야 페르도 에마도 tweesom도 사버 개와 참모탐지야 페르도 우리마도 제부 롱자야 요래 겨심을 롱주 심부 연구래 서바 공대 수제부 기그래 개원 제부 기기 연구 센터인데 좋아요 말에 단대 삼로 다는 게 그저 사바 가가 산제 고반 토비치도 인시 양호셔도 페르도 도와 어제자티 손자 개와 냠촌조 개와 산에 야 페네 로고고요나 아니 장주고 sem기 sem바체체 ngoache 그래서 거라 개와신 그 추진신도는 제부진의 세벌 교르반이 장주 sem기 추신 딱바리한 제부진배 메세 페와리오스 저의 매번 마셔 롱카제체네 마르마르야 펠도 거래 페야데 가르스는 아주 ngoache 교라 장주 sem바리나 두숨도 사베케 참마탐체 산지 요코반토베 교르교르 생게 마사샹가 탄다 사샹가 마오본 사반디고 사망거셔 교라 어팅데코 녀리 나르게 마사샹게 데부 저야 페르 마조셔 마르마르야 도셔 어디지죠? 이 페이지는 뭐도 어디지?
And in a following verse, it describes, Shantideva describes Bodhicitta like a kind of sort of wish-fulfilling tree, in that all other virtues, like the plantain tree, produce their fruit, but then their force is spent. Alone, the marvelous tree of Bodhicitta constantly bears fruit and grows unceasingly. So if we engage in virtuous actions, all of our virtues that are done without being held by this attitude of bodhicitta in our motivation and in our dedication, those virtues will bring about a ripening result. But that's sort of it. They exhaust themselves with that ripening result. Whereas if we are to infuse our virtues with an attitude of bodhicitta, and especially to dedicate them toward the enlightenment of all sentient beings, then there is no kind of exhaustion of the ripening results of those virtues. So in the case of a virtue done without bodhicitta, one may say engage in generosity, and then the sort of results of that generosity will ripen, but then that virtue is exhausted, it's gone, it's all done. Whereas if we have this attitude of bodhicitta, if we really, whatever virtue we do on a regular basis, whether it's some kind of generosity or anything else, if we dedicate that toward the great enlightenment of all sentient beings, then there is no sort of exhaustion of that virtue. If we do all of the kind of positive actions that we do on a daily basis, if we think that we are doing them for the benefit of all sentient beings, for their ultimate enlightenment, then we are going to enjoy the fruits on a regular basis, the sort of ripening results of those virtues. But our virtues will also be continuously increasing, like this marvelous tree of bodhicitta that constantly bears fruit and grows unceasingly. When we dedicate our virtues toward the great enlightenment, then no matter how much we sort of enjoy on a daily basis in terms of the fruits of our virtues, there's no exhaustion to that. All that we have done will continue to increase more and more.
Oh yeah, that is matter. That is the lamna yabudo. The bet of Shindu Meseba said, oh, the bet of Shimbo, by Nami Jojumeba. Sanje de Chu de Sami Lela Soba, Kunjo Sumla Tembe Tibat and Simja Sebala Soba, Sami Belela Soba, Tibet of some Kadeshi Nasigora, Tibet of the Shindu Meseba, Nami Jebu Shindu Meseba, Jojumeba Yonkove, Tibet of some Kadeshi Nasigora, Tibet of the Shindu Meseba. Then it's a witch and you send me back a second signal matter. Remember, give it tomorrow. This one. The birth of the Shindu material, yeah. The birth of the Shindu Messe, or the Shindu Messe Chena, the Shindu Messe Bachana, Palatan and Zibachen Buddhas, Mi Paochile, Lamgad and Rosache, and it Kuma Chakbat and the Mamboyana, Yagashitayana, Mi Paochi Robert Yuna, and a court in Yamdo Droyana, Zibadil and Yodu Trade over Wasagora, or Tina Shinsora, Palatan and Zibachen Buddhas. Mi pao chile tene ni lamla jikba yuna chakba kuma chakba chala chonge tende jikba yuna telia sheme go she ko yabu se lela bu se thadu ro asura pala tene jikba chembutar kala tene yuji treju ba o tene tikba top chembutar jo sigura kaje sa yuna nge song nge do te ji tikba lo so kaje sa yuna te zo ani chanju sem kom so na yuji lela bu se je shindu re sigura tikpa tobjin tikpa sindo mise chena ya pala tene jikpa chenpo tarse kangla tene yuji chojo ba tela pakshen namge chi meten sikdo kangla tene si chanju semda chamba nyinjikla soba kombala tene yu chamgi tikpa tele ane tezo nge songi jikpa la soba le thandu gre si wara tela pakshen namge chi meten o tele ya tene kewa tu tikpa pang chenge chamba nyinji chanju sem komgenge Pagyo tan tembe kansa de sabso chingen kansa de ene tele pajen nam de chi meten de tele chanju semla tenku re songdo oya tiji la ne.
So here, continuing with the benefits of bodhicitta, it says then, Shantideva says, as though they pass through perils guarded by a hero, even those weighed down with dreadful wickedness will instantly be freed through having bodhicitta. Why do those who fear their sins not have recourse to it? So here, those who are weighted down by great kind of non-virtues, great negativities, those that have been committed in relation to, say, the three jewels, in relation to one's guru, in relation to one's parents and so forth, those kinds of great negativities, even those who are weighed down by that, who have committed such actions in the past, they will be freed instantly through giving rise to this attitude of bodhicitta as someone who is, say, like going along a path with many perils, many, say, robbers and thieves and so forth that one needs to watch out for, who is guarded by a hero, they're able to sort of safely pass through those dangers. Even one who has been weighted down with these kinds of negativities, even very great negativities in relation to various objects, if one gives rise to bodhicitta, one will be instantly freed from that kind of danger, the danger of the ripening effects of those negativities that one has previously accumulated. So those who have a kind of fear, who are in fear of the negativity that they have accumulated in the past, why would they not have recourse to it? Or why would they not then rely upon bodhicitta that has such a power to free us from our negativities?
Oh yeah, tante meda. Tante sholo ka chi du til lakshana. Ta o de kangne song de simjen kam singe doa. Kangne song de simjen kam se de. Simjen tamje do sanje ko ban to cha nyam do ne. Jogwa simje tomba la ne sanje ko ban ma to bo simjen do gu me pe kale kare ne tyagin samsange. Chanju simbe tomba la ba kangne song de sora. Kangne song de chanju sim se doa. Oh, tene kangne song de chanju sim. Tene kangne song de chanju sim. 타에 랩도 주지체 심제 타에 바데 거기 동안에 대화를 제외치도 장주 쳐도 심 장주 심베 동발라네 주고 심게 계속 나서 자주 다 몇심을 럽쳐고 이제 주고 심게 계속 나서 메도 바에 심게서 심데 안달을 봐 상제지 고마 마토보다 심데 남에 땅금에서 냠바 지금에서 갱엔 바다부 신 심게 쩌방엔 바다 텐데 촌의 파야 붙이나 단다 쩌방엔 붙이니 참참 chanju sim de yong me do sa ta ye sim ta chanju sim ba se de lam de nyam su lang tu sa ma re sam sa tinde chen ye nya ga yor to ho tinde chan jim ka re ka le chuna nam ya ta chanju sim de le nyam ba chi me sam sa tinde sim ke so na su go to tinde ka sim de yang da lang ju ba tinde so de ni lo gam se a tinde so de ni lo ba yin da ro pame joja sonam shuse pame ba ane raro wala soba changtong nan raro wala soba ase changtong nan raro wala soba ta chemu chega da tende yin chega da ni ku te ba da tende kare na ko chanju sem sanje mato ba do semje tanda chonge su do kora meche kora sanje ko ba to da semje tanda go sarwa ni ku ye de ko sem sobe ten chira Kamalashila choya tenchirwa, tezu kanga kiwa tube tili ndugu yore sora. Oh, tini kasum. Tene sonde ni loga, pangme churjang sedira, pangme me choba tende, changtong wala soba, chemo che wala soba, pangme churjang sonam junje meba, tumashi namga nyamba rabdu chungse. Oh, te sanam namya chanju chodo semde kene ma nyamba che sona, 다 뜻도 개와 사사바래 Kalasane, Devasa, the Jamujana, Semi, so what on the Semi, Jamuda, Demuratana, Tezukanga, Kewata to be order. So called Nilo in Andra, Jamujananda, Changton Anda, Hatakarina, the Karsuna. Sunam San Joya Merita, Kares, Mikora de Kanga, Simja Tamje, to Sanje Kova Matopado, Lo Tangsara. Like Kade Kale Kade Chuna Chanju Sim Yamba Mevere Sarwa, or T. Doni, to Tagdoni, Sondam Junjameva Jonjongare, Sanje Koban Tobala, Pay Nero Duano. And then Lagbar to Simshu in a Kale Yomar, Tandangazulia, Tendeche Kuna Kale Kawur Sangazu Kale Surgudua, Chanju Samba Kale Surgomar, Kawachi Gore, Michi Tistugudua, Michi Chimber don't get his lesson, Chimber long get his lesson. She did change it to some lesson. Nala Robert Cherochin, Alchemy, single longer is election. Kadachun and Namsata Kukabi, I would soon some day teaching her Madonazun, Tacha Masian, called long gets lesson, Yan of the Samson, Tinde Tengio Mara, Kale Mare, Cabo Kata Sugar. She did change it to some like Jason, Tenju Tenda Tunalas, the Omaju workers. Jaselia, Tawan Jungurese, Cabo Yungures, Karasako language to legacy Rava, Pando to age Songo. The thing may touch on but the Tarba Tobel Kawale Lags Kigrichara. Thing may touch on but the Tangachi with Tarba Tos and Tarba Tos on the Thailand Yonge, Rawameva Kawalamego Shasos of Kawayungura, Tarbeto Autora, Tendu Autora, Kawayungura. The legend Kesa and Jusamba to the Lochan to the Simjanget ready Chonani, Hagbe Kawayungu said. Says did Tabasungo, then at our door, Samuel Sushi Kilo and Ursa. Tandangazo Kale Sugo, that way Kale Mangan Sago, no. Kawas is a Kasha Toshitam, Shandu Trivella. Oh, the Jurgis on Gordo, this was a Marazina, which I use some one of my genet and the cat and the Shambada Ninja Comcasho, no Simja Kadizatona, Tawada trainers, Tunga the trainers. There's a summer good time to get a check to say the conditions in Jura some Kawamang Bodua, Kawana Kawa collect up in some Simsukora. Oh, teaching this is Lamna. Mode Tati, Dictation, but a question to a loving something. Make young sings Sigua, Lojonal. But young was on Lotangora, make young se Taran Bulpat, Sanje Koban Topado. Tanda message is Sanja Salomata, Kawashima, Teshima, Kale Yadrone, and the Tenetawan draw the mato, Kaleke Yoma, Tandangazo Kale Surku. Okay, make young sings, Lot Jackie Sidua, Chamba, Ninji, Chanju, Kibu Chungu, Kibu Ding, Kibu Chimbu, Chimba, the Sabala Soba. Yamsolan attended in the other Samanga, some Satagura, to Lobachunju to that of chicken to German, Jackies, Lot Jackies, Kongsan Hersigdoa, Lohloyan Boshe, Katina, Timlu Zamba, Capsule College of Nazutendera, Capsule College of Capitania Yuksha, or a Tende member, Yabel Hayanshaw member, Chui Junashi, Chu Kanga to the Madu, much of the Calicali Tower, Dodoa. Then I said, I was some Tantana. Oh, Tankuris and Gorda, Lord Kong Lord City, Lord Timblutamba. Said I college, she was the college's current membership. So young boy, said I membership. To him, I said, Sanguis Songua. Oh, that is Lamna, Mount.
So here then, for when, and again, this is when one has taken up this kind of attitude of bodhicitta, given rise first to a kind of aspirational bodhicitta, wishing to attain the state of Buddhahood in which one has eliminated all faults and gained all good qualities. One first has this thought of, I want to attain that. And then there's the kind of active bodhicitta engaging with the various trainings in order to actually achieve that goal. So one takes up bodhicitta through a kind of vow. And here, Shantideva's a couple of verses describe the kind of benefits that come when one takes up such an attitude in a kind of unfabricated, uncontrived way. So it says then, for when, with irreversible intent, the mind embraces bodhicitta, willing to set free the endless multitude of beings, in that instant, from that moment on, a great and unremitting stream, a strength of wholesome merit, even during sleep and inattention, rises equal to the vastness of the sky. So here, when one has given rise to this kind of attitude of bodhicitta, we should recognize the kind of incredible benefits that come from such an uncontrived attitude of bodhicitta. So here, we might have like a danger of thinking, you know, I don't know if I could give rise to such an attitude, or if I could hold on to it for all time. But really, if we are able to generate such a strong and kind of uncontrived attitude of bodhicitta, then it's such that it's like continuously working, no matter what we might be doing, whether we are sleeping, whether we are drunk, Geshe says, whether we are sort of playing around. This kind of attitude of bodhicitta remains, infuses all of our attitudes. So if we have really genuinely developed this kind of wish to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, then really all of our actions go toward that. So whether we are eating, taking care of ourselves, supporting this kind of body that is working, or this sort of basis working toward that goal, whatever we do then goes toward that kind of virtue. So whether we're eating, whether we're sleeping, whether we're playing, whether we're getting drunk, that kind of bodhicitta attitude continues. And so here, when we think about the sort of joy that that brings forth, the kind of bliss and pleasure really that come from having this genuine attitude of bodhicitta, it really, if we look at the kind of happiness that comes from an arhat that is, say, on one of the lesser paths, that is striving for their own individual liberation, that kind of liberation that they achieve, obviously there's a great deal of happiness in that, but it really pales in comparison to the kind of bliss and joy experienced by a bodhisattva who has this vast attitude and is working toward that. And again, this is something where when one has bodhicitta, one has this level of mental fortitude, of mental strength, such that there isn't difficulty in engaging or undertaking these deeds to benefit others. So we need, in this way, to be kind of like have a far-sighted, be more long-term in our thinking, be more far-sighted. We are not just talking about this life and kind of making effort in this one life, but we're talking about lifetime after lifetime working for the benefit of sentient beings until we get to that point of Buddhahood. And so all of the kind of trainings that we are engaging in now, love and compassion and generosity and so forth, when one is really infused with a bodhicitta attitude, one is neither in a hurry to get to that goal, nor does one feel any sort of difficulty in engaging in those virtues. It is joyful to engage in that kind of effort. And so this is important for those of us who are not, where we haven't yet given rise to bodhicitta. We really need to be careful to be sort of balanced in our effort toward things. We can't be too intense and sort of like be really working really hard and then get tired of something. We need to have the right sort of effort. It's always described that our practice should be like a stream, like a river, where it's flowing really evenly and continuously. So we don't want to be sort of like make too much effort and then give up too much, but rather like a stream, we should have this constant flow of effort. And when we eventually give rise to bodhicitta in this uncontrived way, then that will really carry all of our efforts in that stream of virtue toward Buddhahood.
Oh yeah, that didn't do some good work. Junjunaria. Dashichira Lodi, Tambo Kumduta Kokale Yores. In a Kale Kabudo, take Tokumari Samsa Samlo Maton Sugora. Come like get Togurese. Junjula, Kale Chindo Mechades, or Kale Kabu Toma Yore, take Kale Kabu do some. You Mashas, Gura, Dogma Mechas, Kale Chindo Mechat. Tedar combe to in is a comdi chigina, and the paruchilia la bushagrese. Carese teda combe to in a kangi minti jigbayase. Soso tarabachico, tuja shivichi, mingdi labdis and soso shenaku, tendechi yoga sigora. Condrice trobuchasuna, server con the trobuchasuna, and it could be menayam madewachi, mena medewacha tende yorese. Lose, soso semgi sometimes your comdicena. Some good or some Tagwamara, good order. So, Kalechindo measure the Kangi maintain Jipaya, Tingy Mena Mega Yurusungua, or the teacher lament.
So when we first begin, it is difficult. It does take effort to try to work on our minds, to change and transform our minds. But we shouldn't sort of give up thinking like, oh, this is too difficult, I'm not going to try. But rather, as Shantideva has said, that there's nothing that doesn't transform through habituation. If we habituate ourselves to something, if we familiarize ourselves, then we can really change from, say, when we had like an enemy whose name we couldn't bear to hear, suddenly we're unhappy if we are away from that person. So this is the nature of our mind. It isn't permanent, it isn't static, but rather we have the ability to transform our minds through our way of thinking. Like we can have an enemy whose name we can't bear to hear, but through habituation, through getting to know them and finally becoming friends with them, we really are unhappy if they are apart from us. So we can see how easy it is for our mind to be transformed. So something that begins as difficult will, through familiarization, become easy.
Oh, yeah. Then did you learn your matter? Katam leg bum, Katam leg bum, Katam belamaso leg bum, Sunshi Yorba. Oh, dinner did the Sungdoa. Kishi Chengawa, Kishi Chengawa, Katam Bekishora. Tarva the Tamje Chamber. Tarvada Tamje Chamber Toba Chebala, Teba Chamber Lamle Shobala, Chitangara, Jigdember Samluta, Teta Mitumba Mambu Chego, Teta Mitumba Nambu Samluta, Teta Mitumba Mambu Chagredon. Dear Lord, Rebecca Lepsona, Teta Mitumba Chagio, or Teta Mambu Chagres on Gora. Kara Chagresana, Naran Chita Mitsube, that is what a talam. Simjele Sanja Cheber Jinshera. Chitang around some Tarva, some gens create no tongue Morocco Carinis. Sanje de Tazula Kushep Chebachura, Michegura. Chita Mizu Sanjeles, Simjele Sanje Cheber, Zinchera, Tijingura, or Tina Cocasura. Naranzo Telen Dode, Sanjele, Simjen Cheban Zingurechera. Kare Sanje Kokusunto, and then touching the Kunga Kagayoma, Tongazu Lapcha to Engadra. Nanzo Konga Shell and Yen, Semjelia, Cheban Zimbaina, Sanje Lagwar to Kebe, Tablan Dora, Mado, Sanje Magubal and Duma, Richard. Semjelia Cheban, Kare Snatella, Sanje Miguza and Minjunchara. Sanje to Lagwar the Kedora. Pena Amachulia Puba never a Shivatunga, the Shivachu, that added to Editana, some Cardina, some Devina. Pudele Yabuchesona, Amalela Pudele Yabuchesona, Amakane Yomara, Pudele Yagachesona, Amakadashi Mado, Amakdu Mara, Yamachi TV, Koli Yagachis. This Angelic Nara to Chevachi capture and then it's an Tarshimbura, Tameba Simjay and then touching Yomara. Tina Sanje Kombaka, Tutado, Simjay, Tambutu Kidune Chamba, Ninjis, go to Simjay and that 2 cases. And the college, some subject and the college, Tanda subject, Mado Koyake Yomara, Sanji Sabala. Think I had to Sanjel Captain Baboje, Telej and Namju Semjan to Taduzape, Chambada Savacheta, Namju did as a case, which is a territory. I did tell an army Tangri, carried just a conduct, just a Tado, just a charge. Sanje Capstation. Amadi Pugulia, subsali future, Amaya says or the Chandura, Kagumarwa. Sanje de Simjan Gucci Matoba, Kawaki, Tapshin Measure. Simjan Sanje, 2 Gué de Carre, 2 near the Carre, Cheva Carre, Simjan and go at the pen talk about the charge pass on the 2 Gedachi, Sanje Yusambana. Simjan Gucci Matoba, Sanje gave a Tapshin Mess and Gua. Or Dingazuti, Tonam have a chair. Simjan Namju Chakshan Kurate, and I kept chairs like a Tamacha, Sanji Jeff, Kaja Jeff, near Lava and Chen Yankimedo, near Cheva Jesus, Simjet to the Keraka Kolo Tanche to Tanda, just Karja and all Jefferson to wear a song to Asanya. Simjanlia, never chair, Kasha and all Jefferson to those. The Karja and Jefferson to wear a song. Simjan get them out of some you are or Sanji Karen Simjan turns the two kit and there's a Tanda Simjan to pay up what is. Nazo tena si chigi said today's quarter mato. Simjan never said it, never said it, kept stressing. Sanjil Karjan kept on doing rest on Gora. The wooden kept on doing the Simjan to her exhibition. It kept on doing it. Tanda Simjan to Mado Congium. Arazo tena si Sanjay combination china. Simjan's vacation was Seguara. The West said in Saguare. Yan Rosa de Simjan, some Tandang Chania, Conde Conduyan Bon Sanjay Kudo. Or the deep vacation with it. Or this was a Kadambelam tradition. This is not militia and now majority Kansas Doa. So the Jigdentam Jet and Mitumba Mambo and God. The Lord Changson and Mitumba, social Yabu and God. Kanga Yam so long to Bengeva Yoma and Nambechu and social load on somebody's chang. And it did Tama to chet to Yabu do some in the Mamba Caliculi Samotaya Remato Jig. Pashetu Kanga Shagu in a Paksa Shagu or no. Oh, dear. Jigden Tamja the Mitumba Chikus, Jigden Banane, Simjele Sanjay Cheban Jinsuda. Shale Ranche Berzinsedo, Shale Ranke Chachura, Tachabuja Ursuda, Shale Ranche Berzincher, Shale Ranche Berzin, Pen Dogwale, Nebacheva, Nebacheva, Pen Tobachevan Zingora, Narad Chanjusam Yamsona Gachina, Pen don't get the pen dog of Kokabungura. Never can get the chosen Koga Mayo or a server Comiaki. Nambu said the West George, but the additional say. Acharchi, but I charge in Yamdo Yode. They will meet you and never shave Sarah. Any subject to the Loma to the Kanga, Dako Yamdo Timana, Yahu to call Logashanas, Madame Marakonga, Pekation Buyese. Not Server Comsa get 10 years, Pento years ago. Sakolo Chayet and the cook of the in a cert of Gora, or day I was also cook up your no. Or Tinduko. No, tende that better below Chango Sir. That is a summer concert to be never Yomarwa. In a low la Chandus and tended in the Chetu, or the Cheku, or the some Sambin and Shana Dera. Oh, this one's a car. I teach you them.
So here, from the this collected sayings of the Kadampa masters, there is a saying by the Kadam master Chengawa, where he says that sort of we, in order to strive for liberation and omniscience, we need minds that don't accord with the world, the sort of worldly attitudes that we normally have. And so even normally in the world, we sort of look at other sentient beings with a kind of contempt or dismissiveness and cherish Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But really, there's no better way to go for refuge than by benefiting other sentient beings. There's no higher way to make Buddhas happy than to actually benefit sentient beings. So like if we have, for example, a mother and her child is suffering and her child manages to get out of that suffering somehow, that mother is going to be happy. It's not going to be like, oh, well, why didn't you ask me for help? There's a sort of recognition that our the best kind of refuge that we can take is by benefiting other sentient beings. And in the way that this is pleasing to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, this requires us to see things differently. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas work exclusively for the benefit of others. They have overcome the kind of normal way that we as ordinary beings look at others, where we sort of look at others as being kind of those that we are going to fight with, or those that might be a foil to our plan, and so forth. Instead, they see sentient beings as this sort of wanting for them to have happiness and wishing to benefit them. So here, when it comes to our own practice of going for refuge and wanting to engage in these trainings, we have to get over the normal ways that we are sort of treating other sentient beings with contempt, while simultaneously then say turning to the Buddhas and showing them a great deal of respect. We can't actually show respect for the Buddhas while we are simultaneously showing contempt for sentient beings who are their highest object of good, that they want to benefit the most. And so the best way to then go for refuge is through our benefit to other beings. And so again, this isn't something where we are necessarily able to generate this attitude all at once, but rather we need to have respect for those kinds of instructions and trainings that we are not yet able to do. We may not yet be able to exchange our kind of self-cherishing attitude completely for an attitude of cherishing others, but seeing the benefit of that, having respect for those kinds of practices, are the way that we will eventually be able to engage in them. So in this way, we should recognize the importance of not just sort of having respect for Buddhas because they're sort of high up objects, but actually having respect for all sentient beings and working for their benefit, as that is really how we come to embody Buddhahood eventually. So there's a story about Atisha, who had in his sort of entourage, the group around him, one person who was particularly sort of ill-behaved, and others in his retinue said, you know, you really should get rid of that guy. I don't know why you keep him around. And Atisha said, well, you may find him quite annoying, but he's actually a great practice for my patients. And so here we have many beings that will benefit us in the world, but those that cause us harm are especially important for times to practice, for opportunities for us to practice patience and be able to eventually work for the benefit of all sentient beings, regardless of how they have treated us. So again, this is something that won't come instantly, but through training our minds, we can eventually get to that point.
Oh yeah, that is the song you are. Kadam Tanda China, Kadam Koma, Laman of the Song Lake Sheraton, or Kadesh Songursana, Chamban Yuji, the Chanju Semda, and the Tongbani, Tondam Chanju Semda, Kunju Chanju Semni, oh, they call and never Junia. There's a community pication with the Songora. There's a Magomnani, Tarwe shirt and Tamje can be chewed one and drive your mardo. What is on Jaco? Dil Tendesongo. Dile Kone Kadamba Comecas. Comdu Lasurita, Sangarazo Kanga, Harry Comgora. Yedam de Larch comes and Tinga, the teacher with a dog. Tai Tumulamjan, no the Turba Nasira. Nijun chancing me out of a thousand with you, and then Lamle show, and then Lato Cometa Lamle Shuni, Natayeta Tizukagachago or Honeshana. Tinangazuti, Niju chancing out of a towel, Tonashimara. The Kumju has a tanga, Tanju the Kangal doors for it. Oh, yeah. A Kumju has so red and Jinju, Nare Kunla Hong Days. Some you chase maybe a lamba yinson. Some make sure Chamba saw all of so water, maybe any. Chinam that have a tamjin, but to be sure do your marto or tea in the Zaka soda. Oh, to the need you chance young dog with all so water, vacation, but you would listen. Oh, this is a Tanga Chanju Semda, take what she be Chanju Semcote, rob the sheds at the top. What do you do? I have to Geshe Yeshe Thabkhe, should devil mess sitting some Mambuora. Should devil mess and I go on Mother Chima Camele, Tina Co, Chambada Nijida, Shell Chopanaco, Kevare de Ordo, Coranche mess and a co Kevare de Ore. This is the co Chambada Soa Namju, Undu Songo, Chambada Soa said the Coach of the Mandina shows. Chuluchi and Jane and Masha says a Cochita Chenaco, Pamarin Yendri, Chambacha, Yora, Chukemalina. Then I say some Jason like Chambacha or Soba. Can't you but the Rankachena de Giorno? Kawachima Yuba Kalina did remember Malina de Giorno. Or Kawachima Yuba Shisha Yuba the Mabam came my Jesha, Shala Sawapa, Kawa trooped and a Kazashira. Yuba in Yanga Yora. A man I could Tonra Eke Yomara. Churnal today or a million sang which would again, but you are chamber con with cell con with Sunday. I would have coached on a coachera. Take on nature killing messing a corner some thunder the shandas yora, going on much just said to some cool man. You know, call do you Timadoya Joshima till Tora Yomara. Joshima may you not a young, going you chigra. Kale yung gurto le tum de ko ang to yena o ti ta ko kyong ya chim ha ba yena ko chue che cha ba che wa che ning che cham chen le so ba ya wo che te na ko so chen de le ke sa de mo de chama jong ra ya ke yo ma ra o ta district ta was chue che ya o ti chi chu ta ani dream ba ta ti rin de ka so da ko pe chang ga jin dam ju chi de Rotomas on that sign in don't do matter. Because it's a you same code, the Chazar is passion, I would have something or dig passion. Yeah, oh, teacher.
So then the earlier Kadam masters stressed the importance of meditating on love and compassion, on bodhicitta, on having this correct view of emptiness and renunciation. But all of those needed to be present in order for our virtues to go toward liberation and to the state of omniscience. So it was said that it's kind of like we all have a deity to meditate on and we all have a mantra to say, but no one's really engaging in these practices. As J.L. Matsongkhapa says in the Foundation of All Good Qualities, having trained in the common paths, may I bless me to enter this mantrayana. So even if we are meditating on a deity and reciting mantras and so forth, we all seem to have these practices to do. If we are missing the components of having renunciation and bodhicitta and the correct view, they're really not going toward a practice of dharma. So here we should recognize really just the importance of having these attitudes. Particularly here, we're talking about love and compassion and bodhicitta. And we can recognize the power of love and compassion even outside of any kind of religious system. Whether someone is religious or not, as His Holiness often says, love and compassion are necessary kind of components. And so someone who maybe doesn't accept their future lives, even if that is the case, that they don't have that kind of view, they're not going to lose anything by, say, practicing love and compassion in this life. They only are going to profit from that. So in society, in our world, we need these attitudes of love and compassion. And whether we are doing so on a basis of some kind of religious attitude based upon future lives, or just doing so recognizing the kind of benefits even within one life, this is something that we all need. So here I have taken the time to sort of go a little bit aside from the text to talk about this equalizing and exchanging of self and other in the context of developing bodhicitta in order to sort of add to the explanation. And so we didn't get back to the text this time, but next time we will turn back to the text because I think we're out of time for today.
Oh, yeah, that did it. That didn't go rim to too much of that. Mamma never says to my shana. Shanda did go with your knuckle, Kayamara. Oh, yeah.
So yeah, next time we will get back to the text of the stages of meditation and go through the kind of important points there. Today we went a little bit outside of that, but we will get back to the text.
Oh, yeah.
Geshe Thabkhe, thank you so much for these beautiful teachings on bodhicitta this morning. And Katrina, as always, thank you for your clear interpretation. And we're so glad that everyone could join us this morning. The next teaching is next Saturday, February 26th at 8:30 Pacific time, 8:30 a.m. And now we'll conclude with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous action spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losong's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the three worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
So we'll say goodbye to Geshe Thabkhe and Katrina, but I have an announcement for the participants online, if you wouldn't mind staying online for just a moment. So Losar, or Tibetan New Year, is March 3rd this year, and it's followed by 15 days of miracles, marking Shakyamuni Buddha's display of miraculous powers to subdue Tirthakas and inspire faith in the followers. And it's said that our merit is multiplied 100 million times during these 15 days and culminates on March 18th, known as the Day of Miracles. So the Abbey plans to send a Losar New Year's gift to Geshe Thabkhe and Katrina on March 18th. And many of you have already sent in contributions. Thank you very much. If you'd like to join us in sending this New Year's gift, we encourage you to go online and make a donation on our website. And we encourage you to do that between March 3rd and the 18th to take advantage of these multiplying days. Or you can mail us a check by March 18th. Either way is fine. So be sure to tell us how you would like your donation divided between Geshe Thabkhe and Katrina Brooks and the Abbey, and any good wishes that you'd like us to pass along. So I hope you can join us again next week. We'll see you then.